Jay, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services, yeah.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor Jay wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor Jay and Ren.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not no.
Let's go to the last part.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
WESN.
Political bias, political commentary, objectivity. These are very interesting concepts that at times are very simple to understand in a way, just through the use of language. You don't necessarily have to go on and on and on about what you mean when you say these things, for the most part. But the actual practice of it, it gets murky because then you have to go into the details. Then you have to go into, was this or was this not bias? Trinidad's media is in an interesting spot because I actually think that in this regards, it suffers from a different problem compared to, say, American media. Now, in America, politics is technically supposed to be divided not just along party lines, but along the ideological philosophies by which both those parties and others derive their policy proposals. Republicans are conservative, Democrats are liberal. The problem is, and what a lot of you might not fully appreciate or understand, somewhere around the time that transitioned from Obama's last term into Trump's first term, those things kind of got mixed up. The Democrats were the party of free speech historically, and now they were calling more and more for censorship. Not necessarily the party itself, but people who identified on the left. The Republicans actually at one point got a little bit less religious for a little time, but then went back to some of their traditional values. But then all of a sudden now, they're the party of less military response abroad, less military intervention, seemingly a bit more isolationist. Not necessarily wanting to proactively go out and secure American interests, which to some extent, it's not unique to America. They're just bigger, so you see them do it more. But my point is, that was a stance that the Democrats used to take. The Democrats were anti-immigration to an extent because that was a pro-labor position. That was sentiments expressed by Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama before Trump did it. But once Trump said it, of course, and this is where they're similar, the other side had to disagree with it. And you see that kind of play out. The abortion issue, etc., etc. COVID, it became politics with COVID, and I stopped following either side because it seemed more like they wanted to disagree with each other. If you said X, we have to say Y. Don't mind that technically a Republican president was the one that oversaw the start of the vaccines, but now all of a sudden Republicans were very anti-vaccine. Now, the thing is, it translates to their media because it's based on ideology, not just the people involved, and therein lies the difference. The people could change, but a lot of the ideologies remain the same. Roe v. Wade is an issue that is not new, and the media houses abroad, they have their own political ideology of what they think is right. And you see that, and interestingly enough, in my household, the TV switches to every channel. 1 minute it could be MSNBC, next minute it could be Fox, next minute it could be CNN, next minute it could be Newsmax. And I do find that it is a bit tiring to listen to some amount of rhetoric coming from media personalities as though, you know, they're part of this. But I guess for them, at least for some of them, they are part of it. They did pick a side, for better or worse. Some try to say they're neutral and they're just doing what they believe to be objectively true. In most cases, that just means either they're lying or they don't know what is objectively true. CNN was at least trying to pull itself back to be more objective. I remember a former CNN journalist basically said she couldn't watch cable news, which included CNN, just because it got too ridiculous at one point in time. But now maybe with Trump back, things are going to be polarizing again and we'll see more craziness. Except CNN, to be fair to them, I've seen them, they're willing to criticize Harris, not just Trump. So they're not so much taking a line in the sand, at least not 100%. I don't know if necessarily it's 50-50, but they're being, in that regard, objective. What is right? Just because we don't like Trump doesn't mean we can't disagree with Harris as well. So that's the American model, and we see that, and I don't know to what extent it's rubbed off on us. But one of the interesting things here is that I actually do think, contrary to popular opinion, a significant amount of the media is not biased either way. Whoever is the government of the day is going to get a lot of bad press because there's more things to complain about them than the opposition. Of course, there are some reporters who seemingly have a consistent stance, but you kind of have to read the tea leaves. Is it 100% accurate to say this? I don't know. But now as we're coming to an election, it'll be interesting to see how consumers interpret news. The reason why I bring this up is recently, and I do think it's fair, some supporters of the PNM complained that we were very anti-PNM recently. I had to say, well, that's what was in the news. The implication being the opposition didn't do anything worthy of commenting. But ironically, not too long ago, I had at multiple points in time, within a month or two, I had a caller complaining, stop bashing the UNC. And not to say that the recent callers said that we were biased, they just complained about the contents of a show, which is fair enough. Because, and this is where, to some extent at least, they were right to say this. We're coming up to an election, so now the media, ironically, has a catch-22. Because it's not like we're a conservative media house or a liberal media house, so we're going to pick a side. Trinidad does not have those clear distinctions. One could argue the PNM is maybe a bit more along the liberal model. The UNC is maybe a little bit more around the conservative model, but to some extent I think that might be just based on convenience, to be honest. And depending on how the wind changes, both parties could actually change their stance as convenient, because they tend to also do the opposite of what the other side is doing, kind of like by default, right? A pro-gun position is not necessarily, well, that is a conservative position. But how far will the UNC take it? Are they saying, you know, like America? Probably not. And depending, if they get into power and see the practical realities, they might walk back on that stand your ground thing a little bit, just a little bit. But as we come up to the election, now the media has to ask itself, to what extent do we want to influence things? To what extent is objectivity even going to influence things? That's the interesting part of it. And then to what extent is it ethical or unethical? Because when the local government election started to come up, we here at WSN, we actually put more thought into the commentary we were going to put out, with the understanding that, look, to some extent, we could help color this thing, and maybe not in the right way. It was, but then it's so subjective, right? So one of the things coming up to the local government election that happened last year was, if it wasn't necessarily about the local government election, did we want to harp on some negative aspect of the PNM or the UNC? It's a subjective thing. It wasn't necessarily easy. But the key point is right now. We don't have the general right now. There's still time for people to put in some effort to look at things from their point of view and to try to figure it out for themselves. What Talking Point's job is not to tell you what to think. If I ever say this is what you need to think, then maybe by all means push back on that, especially if you disagree, because look, no one is always right. But what Talking Point's role is to expose, as well as to start the discussion, to try to look at it from whatever viewpoint seems relevant. And then put the ball in your court. What are you going to do next? If you don't like complaints against the UNC, maybe you should not disagree with the complaints because you don't like it. I mean, a counter-argument those ways, but the PNM has been in power for X amount of time. But the complaints to the UNC is about their performance in opposition and how that impacted the governance of the party. And maybe, if you don't like the observation, try to do something about it within the UNC, or find somebody else to put your hopes on. Because at the end of the day, I think it's a reasonable opinion to say that the UNC has not had a great performance as opposition for the last 9 years. Ditto for the PNM. If this is about the PNM's performance, then we have to be able to speak about the PNM's performance once what we say is not untrue, then no matter how brutal it is what it is. Part of the sarcasm, at least in our case, is not necessarily meant to be taken literally. Part of it is just at some point things are that depressing that you have to have a little bit of levity or try. But we have, in theory, a year to go, right? Maybe less than a year now, depending on when they call it. Now is the time really for voters to get more involved. I don't know if there's enough time to change your parties for the better. But it's telling. One of the things that we have consistently said, voter turnout is low. Engagement is low. Young people that are professionals, educated and capable, entering into politics, they seem to be reluctant to do that, to consider that, to want that. Even if they were in youth parliament. Camille Pascal said his peers in youth parliament, they don't have any aspirations to enter into political life. It's almost like if we have a program meant to expose people, young people, to what it's like, give them a taste of it, let them kind of go through the process, do a little bit of preparation, maybe for those who might aspire to become legislators, except apparently all of them say, we'll take the internship for the experience, but we don't actually care for the position in the company. I'll be honest, the comparison to American TNT is very interesting. There are a lot of parallels, but then there are a lot of diverging points. I'm not jealous of what's going on in America right now. I'm not really looking forward to the result of this election because I don't think I'll like it either way. And there's a parallel with our own election. I suspect I'm not going to really like the result of our next general election. Because in both cases, the question is, what change will come in the future? And a lot of what we do with our local commentary, because we don't speak that much about American or foreign politics, is to point out trends, patterns of behavior, patterns of speech, to try to show indicators of what might be or what might happen in the years to come. And that applies to both the UNC and the PNM, not just the incumbent, because therein lies the question who to vote for. And that's a question that the best answer I've come up with, and I think one of the callers brought this up first, so it's not my original answer. But it's one that I kind of forget a little bit and then come back to as time comes back. It's not about party, it's about the candidate. Whoever's the best candidate, that's who I'll vote for. If they have a Balizi next to their name, well then that's just what it is. If there's a Rising Sun next to their name, that's just what it is. If there's something else next to their name, that's just what it is. And will it make a difference? I have no idea. I know what the trends are, and a lot of people, human psychology says, let's not vote against the trend because that's a waste of time, right? You know, when your group has a consensus and you're like, I'm not going to go against the grain because no one else is, because people are sheep. You know, a person is smart, people as a collective are not that smart for whatever reason, because of the social dynamics, which are varied and beyond my scope to explain. But at some point, if we want things to improve, we have to do something to improve it. And it's not always going to be easy for the people involved. But I'll just say this. I think we need to stop looking And to some extent, this is around the world. The PNM of today is not the PNM of yesterday. The UNC of today is not the UNC of yesterday. That's why Keaton could come here and say, you know, the good old days of Manning and Pandy. He didn't say the good old days of the PNM or the good old days of the UNC. He said the good old days of what we had. We didn't know we will miss it until it's gone. Now, to what extent do we think that this current political landscape is a good one? To what extent do we think this current political landscape can govern the country and move it forward despite the challenges that it has to face? And I'll get into some of those in a minute. Blind loyalty right now, I would argue, is probably one of the worst things that you could choose. And this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. This doesn't mean that I'm saying you're some evil or ridiculous person. But from where I sit, blind loyalty gets us nowhere, especially now because, and I've said something like this before, with the oil and gas running out, we can't afford it. We can't afford the excess. We can't afford the corruption. We can't afford the blind loyalty. Now, that last one is an oversimplification because it's not just blind loyalty. Unfortunately, even the most objectively thinking human, to some extent, still uses emotion in their decision-making process. The how is just what varies from person to person. So I'm not thinking we should just all flip switch and become robots, and it's not so simple. But we have less than a year to go. Do we really think that the equation of our politics as it is right now is going to give us a good answer? Or do we need to change the equation? And then, of course, how does a population of 1.5 million, but much lesser actual voting age, come to a consensus in such a short period of time on that change? And this is why democracy is an advanced way of life. It's not sufficient anymore to just kind of do it in a laissez-faire attitude. That's one of the unfortunate realities of where we find ourselves as other countries. Well, let's not grade ourselves on a curve. Just because they are stumbling means we have permission to stumble. No, we've stumbled enough. But it's left to see now, can we pick ourselves up or will we continue to stumble? I mean, hell, you might even want to debate with me what defines us stumbling. Some of you might think we're not stumbling right now. Others might think that we fall into a pit. And that's what makes this whole thing complicated. But the problem is we can't run from it. In true Trini fashion, we want to shell things. One of the first things that I've ever said on this network is at the end of the day, and Karen said it on Wednesday, it's not just about you and me. It's about our children, and our children's children, and our children's children's children. And I do wonder if the current crop of politicians even care that much about the next generation of their political party, much less the next generation and the ones that follow of Trinidad and Tobago. But enough of that. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the daily review. Stay tuned. This is Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus, quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
All right, you know what time it is. Now, today will be a little bit of a looser show. Was supposed to have my co-host, Mr. Shah, but seems as though maybe he enjoyed yesterday's festivities too much. That's a joke. That's a joke. However, this is not a joke. This is today's Daily Review. All right, first story for the morning. This one came out, I think today. It's an interesting situation in that the Attorney General has come out and defended what happened with the Privy Council most recently. But there's a part of me that it's hard kind of not to find it funny. Now, the Attorney General came on board and there was hope that, all right, he will be better than his predecessor. I have already said recently, I think the last thing that I said about the Attorney General for the year was that, hey, you know, he might actually be worse than his predecessor, which is saying a lot because his predecessor, I think on an objective basis, made some very bad faux pas, very public and bad faux pas. And I'm not talking about the thing with his kids and the guns. That doesn't bother me that much. And I think for a lot of people within that space, national security and so forth, and the practices of national security and what's proper, that's not that big of a deal. But things like laws being written and opinions being given and trying to say that the legal judgment is sound, and then a judge comes back and essentially slaps him in the face with a disagreement, these things matter. And then, of course, the Attorney General had that situation in Miami. We won't go into it. Now, he's trying to defend taking the Junior Sammy matter about the non-payment of funds or the short payment of funds all the way to the Privy Council. And this is where I guess you could say the other side is able to continue to chip away at the government's case, because they pointed out to the fact that, look, while the AG is trying to say that EMBD's appeal was not frivolous, I believe it could be MP Muna Renewal, but at the very least, Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, SC, attorney in the case for Junior Sammy contractors, they basically said, well, the problem is the local judges kind of disagree with you all the way. And the key point, I think, it goes back to what was originally said about the case, that they didn't really seem to have a defense, right? It was clear, therefore, that EMBD did not have a defense to this claim for EMBD to pursue, because the Privy Council upheld what the initial judges said. And it was a default judgment. This was not a, well, I see your evidence, I see the evidence, and I choose. They said default judgment, which maybe I'm wrong, but that basically means government, your case was so lacking, I didn't even really consider it. Therefore, the other side won by default. So then it makes me wonder what the AG is trying to say. And this is the thing. This is why I say communication and strategy-wise, it seems as though politicians these days really, really are lacking a lot. And to be fair, this is actually one of the things I like about the current Attorney General. He's not a politician. It's just that then he wades into political waters and says things that I find to be very much lacking in competence. But the thing is, what competence? Is it public relations, communications, or is it legal knowledge and legal judgment? Because that's the problem. The two-term administration of Keith Rowley had an Attorney General that at times put his foot in his mouth and gave opinions on things saying this is good law, and then it wasn't necessarily good law. And had to always get a senior counsel to advise him, a senior counsel to advise him, a senior counsel to advise him. It was almost like, what? You're not the Attorney General, you're the manager of the office of the Attorney General, because other attorneys are doing the actual legal work. Now, I get it. Obviously, yes, even an Attorney General with senior counsel status and trial experience and all blah, 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 is going to have other lawyers to help him. But it seemed as though far too often this was having to be outsourced. So again, the question is, you have to outsource expertise, then what's the point of having an office of legal affairs and an office of the Attorney General? So he gets replaced, and then the performance issues continues. And this is the thing that I guess Reginald Armour does not understand. You technically started off with a deficit because of your predecessor's performance record. And we were hoping that Reginald Armour, then senior counsel, Faris was not a senior counsel, and it's debatable if he deserved the status, but he got it, whatever, should be someone who could bring stability to that position with regards to the politics of the government. But he himself starts off on the wrong foot with his potential perjury in Miami. So he's starting from a deficit, and now he's trying to tell us this was reasonable for us to appeal. And it's hard to take him seriously when he says things like this. He did say that the Naipon Coolman case disappeared, and that's why they could not defend themselves in their own civil matter, where 9 accused, basically formally accused, I believe, took them to trial, won $20 million. And we were basically told, well, the file disappeared. And then all of a sudden it reappeared, but notice we did not have some great press conference to say how it reappeared, quote unquote. Things like this kind of make the public look at you and say, what's going on? So now to come and try to defend what might just be not really a defensible position, or an indefensible or undefensible, whatever the correct grammar is, position. You're trying to defend the impossible, basically. I don't know if this is a good look, because the thing is, it wasn't just the Privy Council. The local judges disagreed with the government too. And I'll go so far to say that because, again, default judgment. The Privy Council just basically said they were right to give default judgment in this case in the manner of which they did it. This is the same Attorney General that when we had, I believe it was the local government case, or a case where the Privy Council decision disagreed with the Court of Appeal decision, he lauded our local judges. Our local judges are so good. Our local judges are so great. Look, I mean, our local judges are, you know, the best thing since sliced bread. I'm paraphrasing for dramatic effect and sarcasm. But you get my point. He did this trying to defend the government's position, I believe, after the Privy Council basically said, this local government situation, or you're wrong, this ain't gonna fly, come again with something else, but not extend any terms just because you try to do it with a law and not in a democratic way. So, by his argument, why did the government decide to disagree with the judges of the Court of Appeal in this situation? Because again, it wasn't as though it didn't even, this is one of those things where if it was a sports game, we ain't talking that the score was close. At least that's my interpretation of it. I could be wrong. Someone could call in and tell me otherwise. This seems as though it's a situation where the government's side in this equation got stomped. And ironically, not even by the opposing team. They got stomped by the referee. So, I don't get what he's trying to say, because he tries to say that matters like this are reasonable to challenge, but I don't know if he went into enough detail to try to justify that it's reasonable. It was almost like if, and maybe I'm wrong, but it was almost like if he was trying to use general terms to say, well, in most cases, matters like this. But we're not talking about most cases. We have a specific case with specific details that could be scrutinized, and his running defense doesn't really add or make the government's position of putting this appeal all the way to the Privy Council seem like a good idea. And then he's trying to say it does not affect another court matter that includes MP Mudal Runilal in how these contracts are awarded. But one could argue this is kind of like Stuart Young saying, oh, what's going on with America and OFAC and the Venezuelan elections is not going to affect Dragon. Really? I mean, all right, if that's how it works out, I'll believe it then, but I ain't going to necessarily assume that to be true 100% up front. It is what it is. I'm sorry. So we'll have to see how things move on going forward. Ultimately, though, I don't think this is that big of a deal, except I do think it once again shows an example of the current administration's inability to fully appreciate their position in the public perception and how to effectively communicate something given the disadvantages they have put for themselves. And if they continue doing this, and they've done this before in the past, what I'm saying here is technically not new. It might be new to you because of this situation and how you view it or interpret what I'm saying. But what I'm saying here is technically not new. They have done this a lot before, and so has the UNC in the role of the opposition. But the problem is the PNM, as the incumbent, has to try to defend policy positions. So when the public perceives they did a bad thing, they could put a price tag to it, as opposed to the opposition, who, if they have performance issues, we don't have a direct cost to attribute it. Therein lies the disadvantage of being the incumbent. All right, let's move on to the next topic. And I did say, I think last week, right? I believe I said sometime last week or early this week, expect another hit. Don't expect the credit card limits reductions to end there. There's going to be more in the future. Well, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. And to be fair, I did not necessarily expect it to happen so soon, but maybe it's because of the Christmas season. Scotiabank says, and I believe they were the last bank that it was reported on. I don't know if any of the other banks did it. But they are reducing the U.S. spending limit on its credit cards again and restricting Visa debit cards for overseas transactions as it navigates the Forex crunch, as one newspaper puts it, facing TNT. They said, as we continue to navigate the foreign exchange considerations, please be advised that effective December the 1st, the maximum US dollar spending limit per calendar month on your Scotiabank credit card will be reduced. Aero, MasterCard, Black will be given $5,000 US limit. All other personal cards, $2,000 US dollar limit. This change includes all transactions conducted outside of TNT, along with all international online transactions. TNT dollar transactions remain unaffected. Now, this comes after the Minister of Finance. He had something very interesting to say. He said that the foreign exchange window opened by the Exim Bank was a temporary initiative and that the government should not be held liable by certain private sector businessmen for the items they ordered and received without paying for them, because that facility was temporary. Further, the public should not be held to ransom with a threat of increased prices for the restructuring and rationalization of a service that was introduced as a temporary measure during the COVID-19 emergency, which it was well known was always subject to periodic review. Now, on the surface, that seems reasonable. Here's the problem. Our foreign exchange rate is managed by the government. They don't want the rate to fall. This is basic economics, and not economics as in, well, if we just get rid of the economists, things will improve. This is cause and effect in a very basic level. And you see this in healthcare as well. If you don't want the price to raise, then you will get shortages. Now, in healthcare, you could get shortages or the quality could drop. US dollars are binary. They either are or they're not. There's no lesser quality of US dollars. So, if you don't want the increased demand that outweighs the supply to cause the price to raise, and you want to keep the price low, demand is still high. So there will be a shortage. And to some extent, yes, I understand that we should not blame the government for a temporary measure being temporary, but the problem is the temporary measure was to manage a situation that the government has the responsibility to manage. That's the thing. So we're not blaming you for the Exim Bank not being available. We're blaming you for the long-run management of our foreign exchange. Now, one could say, well, look, Sean, aren't you the one that says that the economy has its issues, and what do you expect the government to do? Granted, that is true. But how you manage within the framework of the different aspects of reality can vary. And now begs the question, is this the right decision? Because, and people have pushed back on me for this, but quite a while ago, I didn't necessarily commit or champion the idea, but I brought it up because I wanted to consider it. Other people did to some extent, some economists, some journalists. Why do we not raise the exchange rate? Because demand is outstripping supply. Because what's the concerns of the government? That prices will go up. But now what we're seeing is, to some extent, prices are going to go up. How is that working? Because as Karen said a couple weeks ago, the black market rate is at $8. How are these businesses getting US? Because that's where a much more realistic balance point in the supply and demand graph is. So regardless of what the official rate is, to some extent, it's just going to be pushed more and more to the black market rate, what the cost of doing business is, and the prices are going to go up anyway. And the government trying to say, don't blame us. You're the ones managing it. You're the ones that saying we're not going to raise your rate. You're the ones that don't want the bad press. Not because it's a bad decision, but because you don't know how to really and truly manage the situation. Because the philosophy is not too dissimilar as to when you had to reduce the fuel subsidy. At some point, we're going to have to take bitter medicine, and it seems as though the PNM don't have the heart to really be the people to take responsibility and to show leadership in moments like this. Now the question is, will UNC show us anything different? I don't necessarily think so. Particularly not. Listen, I know some people don't like it. Why are you bashing Kamala? I suspect if she gets elected, she will not want to make big waves. What she will want to do is kick it down the road, like the PNM, who knew, at least some of them, then their political careers had a time limit. They're of a certain age. They ain't going to go for 4 or 5 terms, so they don't need to think that far ahead. I don't think if Kamala wins the next election, she's going to care about 7 years from now. She's just going to care about not being unpopular and not having to deal with stress while she's prime minister for the second time. She'll probably want to enjoy it, and then y'all could deal with it when she's gone, whoever the y'all is. But for the Minister of Finance to say what he said, I am just... And now there's a call for the minister to regulate how banks distribute foreign exchange. One economist suggesting to limit foreign exchange to invest in foreign markets as a short-term measure, which I don't know how legal that would be, but to some extent on the surface that it makes sense based on how you implement it, right? And exactly the source of the funds, if they're coming from local supplies, well then I guess. But ultimately speaking, that's not going to change anything for the Minister of Finance to regulate how banks distribute foreign exchange. It's not. The reason why Scotiabank reduced the limit again is not because they are trying to profit off of people. It's because the supply is not there. And Scotiabank has to look at the situation and say, in December, do we think we will get enough US currency to pay off what we expect to be the transactions that Trinis will undertake in December? And they basically said, no, we don't. And they are basing that on the trends of what is currently going on and what has happened for the last couple of years. And they're saying, we expect the foreign exchange situation to be bad or to worsen, so we need to prepare for that, something that politicians generally don't do often enough. But the banks, unfortunately, they have a very cruel taskmaster. It's called profit or loss. If they lose money, at some point, they will close business and everybody will be out of a job. So they can't afford to lose money. Government could afford to lose money. Live sport could afford to lose money. Petrotrin, Paria, whatever, depending, they could afford to lose money. Wasa, TNT, they could afford to lose money. Private business cannot afford to lose money. And to some extent, this is why maybe certain state companies should perhaps be less operated on the social dynamic and more on a profit and loss model, at least to say break even. This foreign exchange situation is going to get worse. But the real thing is, it comes back to political will, and a lack of political will is not monopolized by the PNM, which is why I lament this election. Let's move on to the last story of the morning. This is an important one. If you think of it as important or not, I think it is because of the long-term implications. So, Minister Gonzalez came out recently, I think early in the week, to talk about appropriate water rates. Because he was saying, can we continue to maintain it by depending on the Minister of Finance who may not be getting the necessary revenue. So what he's saying is, who's going to foot the bill? Because he's actually making progress to get water for all, right? Some people might not have a reliable supply of water right now, but it seems as though slowly but surely, in Tobago, in here, in there, a new well here, a new well there, a new dam there, a new plant there. It might be slow, but you know what? For a country, for a nation, relatively speaking, it might be in the long run be quite quickly the progress that they're making. And slow, sustainable progress is a lot better than quick fixes that cannot be sustained. Quick fixes that cannot be sustained has been the MO of too many governments of this country and cost us a lot of money wasted. But he's pointed the fact that, hey, the future ain't gonna be like the past. This is the when the oil runs out argument. This is the reality. Just because he's saying something that people might not want to hear doesn't mean that it isn't true. At some point, the government's treasury cannot bear all of the costs for the water supply or subsidize it so that the water rates could be low. There's a reason why our rates are low, but other places their electricity and water rates are high. And it's because they didn't have oil money to just throw at reoccurring expenditure. We didn't learn necessarily the lessons well enough from Norway to properly have a large sovereign wealth fund that we could leave alone and live off the interest and the dividends. No, we didn't do that. We're living off of the principal, and that's not good. But the problem is that is only going to last for so long if we try to continue to live beyond our means. It's a common failure of some companies, of rich families, whether nouveau rich or old money. When things start to go bad and you try to keep up appearances, it's a waste of money to just keep up appearances, as opposed to trying to utilize the money to salvage the situation in a practical way. So at some point, though, we have to consider the future when the money is just not available. Because even if we want to keep up appearances, at some point the money we use for that, our reserves, will run out. And that's essentially what the minister is saying. We have to look ahead. If we want our water supply to be reliable for the rest of our nation's lifetime, we have to make sure that we get it at a healthy balance point between the money that the public has to pay and the money that the government could pay. What is sustainable? And remember, the reason why it's difficult for the government to pay it is not just due to a lack of revenue, it's also due to the fact that it's not as though people are not still having babies. Families, in some cases, are having more than 2 children. And new houses are popping up all over the country. New housing developments, new businesses, they all need water. The demand for water is not stagnant. That's one of the reasons why promises of water for all has been difficult. Because when you make the promise, this is the population. And as you try to increase supply, the population grows. The country grows. The demand grows. So you're not just playing catch up to a fixed point. You're trying to play catch up to a moving target. It's not so simple. And we have to now have the hard decisions. Now, it's not to say that the rates need to go skyrocket immediately, and the minister's not even saying right now the rates have to go up. But the point is we have to be willing to have the discussion. And all too often, these sorts of things have been kicked down the road, and kicked down the road, and kicked down the road. Why? Because it was unpopular. Until it reached the point where now, as much as the current administration is kicking some things down the road, to be fair to them, they are not doing so for other things. And maybe they're saying, look, we can't deal with all of these things at once. The population will go nuts. And if that's their philosophy, then I can't fault them for that. But to what extent, ironically, is this hard-working minister going to take a hit because he's saying inconvenient truths? I hope not. because we need more politicians to basically kind of have that moment with the country saying, listen, let's have this hard discussion. Let's not shy away from it. Because we do ourselves no good trying to pretend as though everything is all right and saying, well, it's not a problem, and worrying about the short term at the cost of the long term. All right. Let's take another break. When we come back, we'll open the phone line. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN, the Content Capital. Looser show. People still recovering from the holiday. Just one holiday, but it is what it is. At least everyone's safe and sound in WSN. We'll be right back though after this.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
All right. All you get is me today. My apologies. It is what it is, but now's the time we open the phone line so you can hear more than just me. Or you could leave me to my own devices and suffer through more of me. I will not ever turn down the task of giving more of me. But you could hear more from you if you call in now and you could have your say on this or anything else. It's going to be interesting to see what the opinions are going to be moving forward from the callers as we get closer to the election. I keep trying to get Keaton to give me his prediction. He doesn't want to do it. I myself, I'm waffling. I hate to admit it, but enough of that. We do have our first caller, Digger Martin. Good morning, caller, you're on here. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, good morning. This is Digger Martin. Good morning, Mr. Small.
Morning, morning.
A couple of quick issues. I'm seeing a communique coming out of the Ministry of Education for public holiday in November for the celebration of Kartik. And I want to dovetail that with why they cause a problem with the students of some school who had the Diwali celebration. Now you're given another public holiday for Hindu, all the Mahasabha schools, for a public holiday, Kartik, and 3 days ago you created an unnecessary problem. Now, I want to talk about Ramesh Lawrence, a former AG, clapped back at the current AG with respect to this EMBD. And I have a position that I believe everything stems from the disposition and the demeanor of the gentleman. And I want to go back to his medical episode, perceived medical episode in the Miami affidavits issue. Now we're having something that I believe might be twisted mouth syndrome, trying to clap back at Mr. Munilal and basically giving us some information that is contrary to what actually Mr. Munilal, the Honorable Munilal, asks. He asks a simple question: tell us how much lawyers' fee was involved. Something that we have been trying as citizens to find out how much the government is paying for the legal brief. What the former AG said, your case was like a snow cone in hell, meaning that you lost in the local court of appeal. All the judges say, Papa, put aside money, and you come in to reflect and say, look, it was a good case to go to the Privy Council. There is another serious case in the Privy Council, and it appears nobody pushing it. And remember, there's a magistrate who was made a judge, Marcia Caesar, where everybody in the local court of appeal said the Chief Justice has to answer for making that decision. I want to know, as a taxpayer, is that Marcia Caesar still functioning in the judiciary? And if so, who is paying her salary? If she is not doing any work in the judiciary, then she's paid on a long vacation, because these things must be basically resolved quickly, because at the end of the day, that judgment has a very significant effect on the competency of the CJ, you know. And is the CJ being protected and allowed to stay in office for the current government to choose somebody who's the one? I mean, they say those are simple things we have to ask. We have to ask, and the judiciary look like, I don't know, taking direction or taking advice, waiting for the proper suggestion or the outcome. The other day, I see in Parliament say something, and I was amazed that he allowed to say it. It was sub judice, and the judgment was in sync with what he said this morning.
Caller, I'll have to ask you to end there. All right. Thank you, caller. We have Trin City on the line. I'll respond after Trin City. Good morning. You're on here.
Good morning, Mr. Small. How you going? Let me be quick. Let me see how I could dish up this in less than a minute. The issues with the AG. The AG is supposed to know better. The Attorney General don't have to be a politician. The Attorney General have an easy job. He must operate in truth with the law. That is all he had to do. Operate in truth with the law and communicate clearly what the law is and what the truth is. He blundering over himself because guess what? He comes from a culture of law where they use law for a particular outcome, not necessarily equity, truth, and fairness, with regard to a particular outcome. And I could say that because I spent enough time with my cousin in the past who is now deceased. He was a former assistant DPP, and we used to have these long conversations, right? Setting that aside, he had a guys act together. The AG must understand that his Catholic altar boy, the Mina ain't cutting it. Can't fool nobody with that. Forget that. Fireburn that. Next topic. I'm offended with how the country is being run and how the country is being mismanaged. I'm offended by the way in which they manage the energy sector and wasted money in the energy sector. I'm offended by how they're managing the water supply, roads, crime, and infrastructure. That offends me, right? You had two callers the other day come on and say they were offended by the PNM bashing. Hey, they just define themselves as being members of a cult. Right? The country going to hell in a handbasket with management, but you're offended by the PNM bashing. Right? Grow up, fellas. Big men, all you grow up, talk the truth, understand what truth is, and understand what fact is. Because the country is not benefiting by the PNM not washing the dirty linen in public. Because the stench of washing the dirty linen in private is affecting the whole country, not just the PNM. Have a good day. Go brave. Take care.
Thank you, caller. Not the framing I would have chosen, right? Because I do understand, at least where one of the callers from Wednesday was coming from, almost completely. I do understand. But we do have a Rimoni line, so let's see what he has to say. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Right. Short and sharp. With respect to the topic this morning, yes, is the key constitution. Problem. The Attorney General should not be appointed by the Prime Minister as part of his cabinet. He's supposed to be totally independent and protect the constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Caller, now in principle I agree with you. In practice, because I've had to think about these things before when it came up with other institutions, how do we do it? Because our political system of government is not really built to properly appoint people independently. Because a lot of the independent people are appointed by the president, who is appointed by the prime minister. So we have a problem with regards to that. Now, the thing with the Attorney General is that then there is the double complication of he does have to work with cabinet. It's not like the Auditor General or the procurement regulator or the ombudsman. The Attorney General has to directly work with cabinet. It's a very important position. But as Karen points out, they are not like a voting member of cabinet, a policy voting member of cabinet in the UK, I think, because that's the thing. They are supposed to be the state's attorney, which means not just the administration, but also the country for the people. And those interests are not always exactly equal. So I get where you're coming from. I just think that what we really need to fix it would require serious changes a la constitutional reform. And I don't know how many politicians are willing to go through that to any degree. Notice, we had that whole thing. It was a big hullabaloo, right? And then it dies down. It's gone, you know. And it's kind of like Tobago autonomy. We get it. We get lip service, but do we actually get implementation? Probably not. We have a call on the line. Shagon is on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
This whole EMBD business, I explained that to you all before, but you all seem to forget.
I actually did forget. I don't remember.
Well, when Williams was here, I always hear he was the best. All these things to do with estate management was handled by the director of surveys. And he decided to break it up, and he put the estate management section with the valuation division. He never changed the law to that effect, and that caused the problem. In the end, they make that estate management development company with nobody with any qualifications in estate management. They claim one fella had it, an Indian fella they call Rao or something like that. But when you check up on Rao, he was head of division, which covered estate management, but it covered other things like land surveying and whatnot. And he didn't come up through estate management. And that is the cause. You see, these problems, you have to have proper investigation as to why you have the problem. I always say how you get the problem is important. The second thing you talk about water, and that is one again I went through with you, right? Because at independence, none of our water authorities, because we had a number, and then we put them together into WhatsApp. None of them was unable to cover the running expenses. The capital expenses to put in there was covered by central government. They were given to run the agencies. And we had any government agency supposed to sit down and say why we reach this position where we cannot. Some time ago, we had it with the Parliament, and the Parliament put up a proposal, which is the one we handled, and nowhere we can see the public service input into it. Again, with the day when I called in, this another guy rang in and said, yes, the Water and Sewage Authority had put up their proposal, but it was ignored. Maybe he had. And this is why we have these problems. We are not following our system of government, which again I have pointed out, that at independence we had one of the best systems of government in the world, together with a place they call Singapore. Now Singapore have kept going according to that system. And if I move from one of the most basket case countries in the world to one of the top economies in the world. Any questions or queries? Or?
No, because I know what you said about WASA, and I guess this is where there will be alignment. Government ain't collecting their revenue, and now they're trying to do something.
They're trying to do something, they're not researching the problem.
That as well, and I believe I believe you when you say these things, because we see similar things in other areas. So, and I'll get to that in a bit. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the long and short, and I think this is similar enough. That's why I'm going to put it together. Unqualified people doing a job, right? That came up with Paria, where we had a caller basically say, hey, and I can't remember if this was on air, if this was off air, so I don't know if the source is a caller or the source spoke to me privately, but I do believe I did present it to the fact that, look, they seemingly lost a lot of institutional knowledge when they replaced long-term people who probably were more expensive and, cost-cutting, except you replace them with people who may not have the skills, cheaper, but we potentially see the results of that with the Paria tragedy. And then something that came out this week that I didn't get a chance to get to, a judge, to be fair, I have disagreed with one of his public rulings before, very strongly. But I agree with what he said this time with regards to the Performance Appraisal Board and the Commissioner, because apparently they made a change to the policy, and the judge basically said that, look, you can't assign points for assessment to years of service. Years of service cannot give you points in assessment, because that conflated seniority with performance. Because I believe what happened is the policy is supposed to be that you look at the last however many months, right? You don't look at the person's seniority. You don't look at the years of service. You know what the union likes to say, years of meritorious service. But for promotions, you look at the recent data, because what you may have did well at a lower rank does not indicate what you may or may not have done well in your current rank, and what you're doing in your current rank is the best indicator, but not necessarily 100% accurate, but the best indicator of what you might do for a future rank. Basically to say, you don't look at a colonel and say, I'm going to promote him to general, or a brigadier general to say, I'm going to promote him to major general. And you look at his track record as a lieutenant. You know, how good of a lieutenant was he? That should have been done already, which would have allowed him to go up the ranks. And now as a colonel, how did he handle a regiment? And we need to know this, or a battalion, and we need to know this in order to figure out how will he handle a brigade. A brigade commander, how did he handle his brigade? We need to know this to figure out how he'll handle a division. We already assessed how he handled a platoon. That was done when we gave him a company, because he came up the ranks. So seniority, conflating seniority with performance, that is essentially what critics of the HR practices of the public service have been saying for I don't know how long now. That we don't promote people based off of merit. We don't promote people based off their skills. We don't promote people based on their performance. We don't pick the best person for the job. We pick the most senior. And these are the results we're getting. Essentially, just you look at the general results of performance, and this might be a major clue as to why. And the professor's basically saying the same thing with AMBD. We have San Fernando line. Good morning, caller, on here.
Good morning, Sean. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Sean. You know, this situation with the Forex, we can't be spending at 4.3 BCF per day and only producing 2.4. So something is going to have to give, and I think it is not such as a bad thing as a lot of people think. There needs to be a balancing of supply and demand with respect to the Forex, and I think this is what we are going through right now. A leveling off.
Yes.
And of course during that leveling off, you're going to have a little pain for some people. I do think, however, the banks have been a little unfair to some people going to the bank for a little cash. So when they travel. So, but in all, I am not worried about the situation right now, Sean. It's a balancing off. But there's one thing I want to ask, if you'd allow me to ask the professor, and it's for information's sake. I was sitting down with a former politician, and he was telling me Trinidad and Tobago had diplomatic relations with Singapore in 1971, established diplomatic relations with Singapore in 71. And he said somewhere around 74, I think it was, that there was a delegation from Trinidad and Tobago that was sent to see how Singapore was operating. I don't know if he knows about that, and if he could probably share his knowledge, if he does know about it. So for education's sake on the program, that'd be great, Professor. You have a good weekend, Sean.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, caller. Well, we have Shogunas on the line. It might just be the professor calling back. Professor?
Yeah, the question the caller asked about, right?
Yeah.
He's correct, but it's even worse than that.
Go ahead, caller. Did we learn anything from it? What was that?
The head of Professor, the head of Singapore were good pals, and they put up similar system. But the problem is we never kept to the system. Right? Now, as regards promotion, it's not you don't take seniority. What the law, what the public service regulations say, is for routine tasks at a lower level, you put greater weight on seniority. But for the upper posts, which calls for using your intelligence and all this thing, you put greater weight on merit.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, so the example was the police service, which their rules were different. But yes, I did also bring in the public service in it, so thank you for that correction. Because you know what, to some extent, I could understand for lower level positions using seniority. I could understand that, right? Of course, now it's subjective what the limit is, and if we were in a different environment, I'd be a bit more confident that we would be getting the equation right. But I think with regards to our hiring practices, and with regards to our promotion practices at the senior level, I think it's questionable. Now, and one of the things that I have spoken about before in the past, what also adds to the challenge, and it's not an excuse, this is just another factor to consider, is the fact that too often in Western society, our education system and our essentially how we promote our hiring and promotion practices from the ground level, from the bottom level, doesn't always give us the best results to then find people who are good critical thinkers who could then be leaders. Because too much of our education system is to pass an exam, which means you memorize something to repeat it in school, not think through problems, right? And then how do you start off your work experience at a low level position where your main task is to be seen, not heard, because you're not paid to think? So the problem is where essentially along the way, everything is geared towards people who will do what they're told and not have an opinion, and then somehow we have to figure out of that environment who can we select that will have good judgment, exercise good decision making, and give them more responsibility. And judging humans to some degree will always be subjective, so we reach where we reach, which is where it makes it more, it's not an excuse, because at the end of the day, you can't afford failure at that level. That's why CEOs, when they have one bad decision, they could be replaced, right? Because the losses, as you get higher and higher, they're just too much to bear. This is not the clerk will kind of learn as he goes along. This is why I had such a strong position from the jump with the current Commissioner of Police, and the whole promotion situation I believe is involved in with regards to the policy change that this judge is basically striking down or speaking out against. Now, a couple of things before we close up the show. With regards to the school and the whole Indian wear situation, the minister's come out to say that nobody in the ministry should have said or given a memo to the effect of saying that they have to wear the school uniform. So that's a very strong thing to say for the minister to say that. So now the question is, what's going to come out from this, right? Beyond just, okay, I want to defend the government, because that's how it's going to kind of come across. But to be fair, this is an effective defense as opposed to the AG. The AG is trying to defend the government's position in a no-win scenario, I would argue. But the minister is saying, no. This should have never happened. And she's coming to say, now the question is, what will be the consequence for the people, for whoever that sent that memo out? Because while I'm not necessarily saying they should be fired, we need to see some kind of consequence, because society needs to see, and the people who work in that institution in particular needs to see consequence, because if they have no consequence, there's nothing to stop something similar like this from happening again, right? The minister said there's no policy, so now she's investigating the memo that was sent to the principal. It's a shame that we only get this so after the fact. That's the one chink in the armor. Why wasn't this done proactively before Wednesday? Why was it done now? I don't know if the timing would have been right for the minister to intervene, but that's a big deal. As small as it is, that's a big deal to say a memo was sent out. I believe the Presbyterian Board said it didn't come from us. The memo was reported to have been sent by the Ministry of Education. The minister saying that there's no policy. That memo should not have been sent because there's no policy to back that up. I want to see something, some resolution to this. Now, a couple other things I want to get through quick. I just want to, and again, this goes back to the Attorney General. He made a big thing about not wanting to reveal who got government payments what lawyers did because it's not safe. Then he wants to reveal Ramsaran's business, and Ramsaran is saying, don't we, well, not him, the Minister of Finance, don't we have a right to privacy on certain things? This is the thing where the government needs to, in television, it's called continuity. In governance, it's called consistency. And this is one of the issues why politicians get in trouble. They're not consistent because they make decisions too much based on whatever agenda, whatever bias or agenda that they have. So they will try to make some good decisions on their hiring. Oh, look, we got this great person, that great person, and then slip in a political appointee because the main consideration is it's a political, reliable person and we need to give them something. Not all government hiring practices will be bad. They'll just kind of slip in some bad with some good. But the problem is then, in some ways, it doesn't really work because instead of the public saying, oh, well, at least we got some good, because that's not really a good thing, the public is saying, oh, there's inconsistencies here. It seems as though they're hiring on different criteria because, or their policy decisions is based on different criteria. Because when we see them trying to go in both directions at the same time, or at least different subsections of government want to go in different directions on what might be the same principle, what is that left for the public to think? And I've pointed out these things before on both sides of the aisle. And unfortunately, these are just more of the things that we need to be willing to discuss as we come up to the election. Now, I will close by saying, Mr. Drincity, I appreciate the support. Just frame it a little bit, you know what I mean? Because to some extent, I could understand where the very, 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 very diehards, using the term cults, I could kind of understand that. But I do think that Mr. Dabadi, it wasn't so much of a cult as it was, well, he's been a long-time member of this organization and he believes in it. And the problem is, I think, he's remembering what it was. And maybe, assuming my takes on the current bad decisions are correct, he's not coming to terms with what it is. And similar things could be said for other supporters of the PNM and the UNC. Similar things, maybe not with the exact same details, could potentially be said for other politicians and other parties. That's why objectivity ain't easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And even to some extent, are we being objective when we criticize? We're using the context of past behavior. Is that objective or not? That's also a philosophical debate that we do not have the time for because it's the end of the show. We're way over time. Have a great weekend, everybody. Make this weekend a good one. You could do it if you try. And today, a good day. As Mr. Shah would always say, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. At a time when we need the light to conquer the darkness, the key point is don't wait for someone else to bring light to your life. Bring light to your own life and let it spread to others. And we will see each other next week. I will be on the sister aisle. I will enjoy it, or try to, for all our sakes. Bye-bye.
WESN.
The home of Caribbean content is growing and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, Contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing@wesncc.com or call us at 628